Thank you. I'm Ottessa. I am not Rachel Harrison. I really wanted to come, so I do live in California, and I really wanted to come experience this show in person before really collecting my thoughts about what to say. And I thought of a lot of things when I was looking at the catalog, and I can't remember what any of them are now because my feelings in this space have totally displaced them. I guess I want to say that Rachel Harrison has been a huge influence on me, and not in a way that you might expect. Rachel Harrison is the artist who first introduced me to what is art in its most contemporary sense. She showed me that there are levels and that there can be irony, vulnerability, and sincerity all at the same time. And she taught me that 20 years ago when I was a junior at Barnard, and she was my sculpture professor. I was an English major, she was an adjunct, and I had no idea that she was going to become who and do what she's done in the last 20 years. But it was a really important moment for me. I had always done some sort of visual art, but sculpture had never been my forte. I'm much more two-dimensional. I mean, one thing that strikes me about, especially the sculpture in this exhibition is how much it feels like a materialization of the imagination, and yet it is as abstract as the materialization of what the imagination would be. It's somehow real and not real. It's a thing and it's an idea so much at the same time that when I'm experiencing it, I don't really want to decide how to look at it. I just want to look at it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when I was Rachel's student, I was probably really, really pretentious, but also very, very self-serious. And I didn't know Rachel's work at all, but the first assignment we had in our sculpture studio class, which was, by the way, in the coolest building ever. So it was a Columbia art class for undergrads, and it was in this really old building on 125th Street, with just these crazy open spaces and all this old machinery. I can't remember exactly what it had been, but it was like a dangerous space. They wouldn't let students in a space like that anymore. I'm sure a lot of people hurt themselves there. And actually, it was I haven't really destroyed anything except this one time. It was in this building. It was a senior art show of sculpture students and the undergraduate sculpture students at Columbia, and there was this young man who had been working painstakingly on this one piece of art that was bowling pins, arranged the way that bowling pins would be arranged at the end of a bowling alley. And I was just talking to people, and I just did this. I just took one step back, and they all smashed, and it was kind of beautiful. And he it was a horrible event, this was his work that he'd been working on for so long, and he said that he had hand cast every single one and painted them, and I had ruined them in a half a second. I don't know why I'm telling you that story, just that it was dramatic, and that's where I studied with Rachel. Anyway, the first assignment Rachel gave us, and this was a Sculpture 1 class, and most of us weren't art students. I remember there were a couple people studying art history, there were a bunch of English majors, comp lit people. Anyway, the first assignment was to go get a New York Times Sunday paper, and that was like before they changed the format, so this thing weighed like 10 pounds. It was enormous. And to take it home and to make something out of it without using any other materials. So what I did was I made a person out of this newspaper. Actually, I kind of cheated. I had a friend who was studying architecture. She came over and was experimenting with the newspaper, and she made a spine that really helped structurally when you're creating it was definitely a male gendered person, because you could identify that it wasn't a woman, and that for some reason that seemed important coming from the New York Times. But I didn't think too much about what any of it meant. I just knew that the material was going to intrinsically lend itself to what the thing was. And then what it ended up being was a person. And I remember Rachel asked me, "Why did you make a person?" And I said, because I measure things by people. And that has kind of come to be true. I measure things by people. I'm a writer of mostly fiction, and what matters to me are the ways in which people relate to each other and communicate and miscommunicate, where we stand and how we move and things like that. So that was my one great work of art. I think I got a pass for the class, but Rachel was a really interesting teacher. She was probably, actually I just talked to her. She was here 20 minutes ago. She told me that she was 33 when she taught this class. I'm 38 now. I can't believe she was 33. That really blows my mind. And it was really cool to walk through the exhibit and see what art she was making around the year 2000. Anyway, I'm sure you'll get a sense of the journey as you look at the art yourself. But Rachel was much more political than I thought that she was going to be. She presented as an extremely strong-minded person, and her critiques were exacting, demanding, and really funny. Her sense of humor was there were moments in class where people got upset. I'll just say that, because she would make jokes at their expense. But it was a great education, and what happened was, there was this moment, and I recounted it to Rachel, and she didn't remember it, but toward the end of the semester, and by the way, she was also very prophetic, and this really matters. This was right before, so it was the year 2000, I think, right before the 2000 presidential election. So many people in my age group who were new to voting were very excited about Ralph Nader. And she told us really frankly and passionately to talk to our friends about it and not to vote for Nader. Because if we did, George W. Bush would win the election, and then we would go to war immediately, and she was right. And that had a huge impression on me as someone who was completely naive. So 16 years later or something, I sit down to write a novel, and I don't really know that I'm setting it in the year 2000 yet. And I don't really know what my character is interested in yet or where she works. But because of experiences that I had that year taking that class with Rachel, who said every week, our homework every week, in addition to doing some kind of actual artwork, was to go to a gallery in Chelsea and see what people were looking at. And that made a huge impression on me. So when I sat down to write this book that came out about a year and a half ago, it's a novel. for some reason, I wanted my character to be involved in the art world in some way. And then I quickly realized that she was involved in a very superficial way. She was an assistant to a gallerist, and didn't really have great responsibilities or any real intimate understanding of what goes into curating or being an artist at all. She was in this very like privileged and shallow perspective of looking at the art world with like the harshest and most insensitive, I don't know, judgment, so that she could feel like she was above it all. So as I was writing the book, I had to create what art was in the gallery that my character worked at. And I didn't really realize that I had unknowingly set my book in the year 2000 until I started having to invent the art. I am not an art historian by any means, you can probably tell, but there was something about visiting the art world in Chelsea when I was 19 that feels really different from now. It was like Damien Hirst was everywhere with his like animal halves, and there was like everything felt kind of like, oh my God, gross, you know? And that resonated with me and disgusted me at the same time. I mean, it inspired an entire book, so like, I guess I love it, but also like shadowing over all of that, like playfulness, like the playfulness that I wanted to capture in the art that I invented for this fictional gallery was the shadow of what was going to happen a year later in 2001, especially in New York. I mean, we all know what happened, I don't really need to say it, but it was, you know, hindsight, there's what one day can seem like exuberant and playful, the next day can seem like excessive and disgusting. So I was kind of interested in like both sides of that idea. So I want to read how my protagonist in this novel called My Year of Rest and Relaxation describes the gallery and the art in the gallery. And then I'm going to try to bring it back to Rachel Harrison. Okay. Is this like interesting at all? Okay. Okay. So this is the narrator speaking, and I guess what you need to know about her is that she's in her early 20s. She studied art history at Columbia. She's tall and blonde and beautiful and looks like a model, and she's kind of full of herself. She's super depressed. She's aggressively depressed. And the novel follows her journey. I hate that word. Follows her on her mission to sleep away her problems, like quite literally. Like she takes gross amounts of sedatives in order to sleep for a year, thinking that if she can sleep long enough, her cells will have regenerated the number of times they would need to have been cleansed of whatever trauma she's holding on to. And she has experienced trauma. Both her parents died recently, so she's kind of an orphan, but she has tons of money. So she's emotionally bereft, but practically very wealthy. And anyway, so here's how she kind of talks about herself and about the gallery where she works. And the gallery is called Ducat. Don't know why I called it Ducat, but okay, here she is. Since adolescence, I'd vacillated between wanting to look like the spoiled wasp that I was and the bum that I felt I was and should have been if I'd had any courage. I'd shopped at Bergdorf's and Barney's and high-end vintage boutiques in the East Village. The result was an amazing wardrobe, my main professional asset as a new college graduate. I easily landed the job as a gallery girl at Ducat, one of a dozen fine art galleries on West 21st Street. I had no big plan to become a curator, no great scheme to work my way up a ladder. I was just trying to pass the time. I thought that if I did normal things, held down a job, for example, I could starve off the part of me that hated everything. If I had been a man, I may have turned to a life of crime, but I looked like an off-duty model. It was too easy to let things come easy and go nowhere. Being pretty only kept me trapped in a world that valued looks above all else. Natasha, my boss at Ducat, was in her early 30s. I'm gonna skip this. Natasha wore the same kind of outfit every day, a YSL blazer and tight leather pants, no makeup. She was the kind of mysteriously ethnic woman who would blend in easily in almost any country. She could have been from Istanbul or Paris or Morocco or Moscow or New York or San Juan or even Phnom Penh in a certain light, depending on how she wore her hair. She spoke 4 languages fluently and had once been married to an Italian aristocrat, a baron or a count, or so I'd heard. The art at Ducat was supposed to be subversive, irreverent, shocking, but was all just canned counterculture crap. Punk, but with money, was the slogan. Nothing to inspire more than a trip around the corner to buy an unflattering outfit from Comme des Garçons. Natasha had cast me as the jaded underling, and for the most part, the little effort I put into the job was enough. I was fashion candy, hip decor. I was the bitch who sat behind a desk and ignored you when you walked into the gallery, a pouty knockout wearing indecipherably cool avant-garde outfits. I was told to play dumb if anyone asked a question, evade, never hand over a price list. Natasha paid me just $22,000 a year. Skipping. Natasha's star artist was Ping Shi, a pubescent-looking 23-year-old from Diamond Bar, California. She thought he was a good investment because he was Asian American and had been kicked out of Cal Arts for firing a gun in his studio. He would add a certain cachet. I want the gallery to get more cerebral, she explained. The market is moving away from emotion. Now it's all about process and ideas and branding. Masculinity is hot right now. That's Natasha talking. Ping Shi's work first appeared at Ducat as part of a group show called Body of Substance, and it consisted of splatter paintings a la Jackson Pollock made from his own ejaculate. He claimed that he'd stuck a tiny pellet of powdered colored pigment into the tip of his penis and masturbated onto huge canvases. He titled the abstract paintings as though each had some deep, dark political meaning: Blood-Dimmed Tide, and Wintertime in Ho Chi Minh City, and Sunset over Sniper Alley, Decapitated Palestinian Child, Bombs Away Nairobi. It was all nonsense, but people loved it. Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes on like that. There's, there's more, and then on a low pedestal in the corner, a small sculpture by the Brahms brothers, a pair of toy monkeys made using human pubic hair. Each monkey had a little erection poking out of its fur. The penises were made of white titanium and had cameras in them positioned to take crotch shots of the viewer. The images were downloaded to a website. A specific password to log in to see the crotch shots cost $100. I don't know why someone hasn't done that. It's a great idea. So I don't know. Sometimes I think about what the critique would have been if I had presented these fictional art objects in my class with Rachel. And I felt like when I was writing, I wasn't really talking with her. I was more kind of like imagining her expression. I'm not sure she would have liked any of it, but what I think, say, someone asked me a question right before I started talking, and I want to try to answer it. But I think the way that Rachel's work is, I don't want to say reflected in my imagination, but rather stands at an extreme away from it, is that all the projects in the novel, like for example, that one artist, young artist Ping Shi, who ends up having a major role in the novel, he has a solo exhibition of taxidermied dogs that, I mean, it's really disturbing actually when you think about it, but in the context of what is like this kind of like satirical and obscene world, it's like nobody's batting an eye, like having like a taxidermied poodle or like a little chihuahua. And not because they were someone's beloved pets, but because he decided that was his artwork. I mean, whatever. It's like can't judge a fictional character, although people do. Like, I guess what I want to say is, these are all pretty cheap tricks, and they like represent what, like, I've started using the word TV as like a derogatory word about art, where there is no essence or spirit behind the thing, that it's made purely as a product to elicit a certain reaction, and it means ultimately nothing. And I feel like that's one major difference between, I mean, if I'm gonna try to compare Rachel Harrison and my bullshit art ideas, like Rachel Harrison exists like on an extremely meaningful level, away from these, like the junk that I'm creating in this satirical world. But like I said, like I feel like for me, her work doesn't like beg me to figure it out. I feel like at least me, I can engage with it in sort of a subconscious way. Like I'm looking at the visual projection of her subconscious. So, I don't know, how are we doing on time? We have plenty of time? Well, I don't know, maybe I'll pause and see if anyone wants to say anything or ask a question.
So just why did you want to depict artists that you're calling like make TV art or like cheap tricks? Like, what was your motivation? If like, it seems like the art that actually moves you or inspires you is something that like is profound. So like, how did that like intersect with your idea for the novel to like create an artist that like, you know, art world readers like wouldn't admire or?
Oh, that's like exactly what I should be talking about, right? Thank you. I wanted to create this art that I wouldn't be moved by, to illustrate the flatness of my character's experience of reality. Like, she quite deliberately evades anything profound. She can't watch certain movies because they will elicit too much from within her. She can't listen to music, like full stop, because it makes her feel too much. And she is trying to shut down. And so I think, you know, when you're writing a story or a book, a narrative, the world external to your protagonist or your narrator is a reflection of the interiority of your character. So in her world, right, this is all meaningless. This is all trash, and that people love trash. So this like devastating fact for her becomes a motivation for her to run into this project of sleeping for a year. I mean, art, like the one place where we're supposed to be the most human, has become so shallow. So that's why, you know. But and at the same time, like I guess I can be super critical of her description of the art world, but there is also some kind of like funniness to it that has value that I know she also values because she's telling it to us in the book. So, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about or to your sort of general reaction encountering Rachel's work here and the way you sort of experienced the exhibition?
To be perfectly honest, it made me feel a little sad. It made me feel like, well, at the beginning, like her earlier work, there was a sense of, I don't even know if it's nostalgia, but a sense of the time that's passed and like the youthfulness of that, like the way that she used materials, like those buckets, like all these things that looked so inexpensive. You feel so much like you're in an artist's studio and maybe she doesn't have a lot of money, you know? That felt so kind of like heartbreaking in a way, and sweet, and like like gesturally, the jokingness of it, because it was so, I don't want to say like not so labored over. Like the sticks hanging from, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the, like all those things hanging from the sticks. I don't know why that breaks my heart. 'Cause it's like somebody's dream of these things that have been, like they've been seeing around. You're almost like, well, let me just put them somewhere so I know where they are. And I don't know, something about that moved me in a sad way. And then moving into like the more recent work, I mean, there's a sense of just like, I'm just confounded by this shape. Like, what is this shape? And like, what is that texture? Fraggle rock? Like, it feels like it could be something from childhood or something from somebody else's childhood, and then also completely foreign and unknowable, you know? So it has this like nostalgic familiarity, and then this like very stoic, like literally stoic unknowability. And yeah, I mean, I think that some of it can be like, this might be my favorite piece, just visually, very beautiful. But then, you know, and then I was thinking like about her colors, and I don't know that much about like how your brain responds to colors, but there isn't a lot of, it's very clear, and I don't know if she's like, if she were here, I'd be like, how did you get that pink? Did you like go make it? Or is this just the pink that was at the store, you know? Because there's something about like just doing with what you have that feels so, like on the ground. Like the work is to a human scale. Like it's not being pulled out of the ether from someplace, you know, from outer space, which it's just nothing wrong with that way of doing things. But like her drawings over, so these are photographs of drawings of Greek statues, is that right? That she drew Greek statues over. And I mean, I thought that was really, really interesting to be like revisiting something that's been objectified in a way. Yeah. And I felt like I laughed a lot. I mean, like I saw little things that made me laugh. And also just, you know, I think for me it's much more interesting to look at something and go, what? Than, oh, you know? Because like I can keep engaging with it. Like I can keep engaging with this yellow. I'm like trying to imagine her painting that, and like, did she really decide to do that like little curly cue up there, or was that an accident? And how much was she thinking of that Santa who's getting arrested while she was painting it? I don't know. I mean, it's just like kind of endless. So I would say curious, you know, curiosity. That's like mostly what I felt.
How would your character in the novel respond to this exhibition?
I think she would be really intimidated. I think that she would want to first pass it off as like, I don't know, thought like a wig, really? Like you put a wig on some weird shape. I'm sure she would like try to make it seem like this was just part of the conspiracy of everyone becoming just totally okay with playing the game of the Emperor's New Clothes. As a way of just estranging herself from really having to investigate with any curiosity what something was. So, I mean, but I think, okay, maybe after she cures herself with sleep / brain damages herself with pills, I think she would be really moved. And I think she would spend a lot of time looking at each thing. Actually, maybe what I'll do is, wait, is there another question? If you don't ask a question, I'm just gonna go off course. So if there is a question, ask it. Okay, I'm gonna go off course. About the experience of art, I thought maybe it would be nice to read this bit toward the end of my book that happens after my character has put herself to sleep for a year. She kind of comes to and has to start all over again. But she says, I found my way into the Met one afternoon in early September, and we really don't know, like, is she okay? Like, we don't know. I guess I wanted to see what other people had done with their lives, people who had made art alone, who had stared long and hard at bowls of fruit. I wondered if they'd watched the grapes wither and shrivel up, if they'd had to go to the market to replace them, and if, before they threw the shriveled strand of grapes away, they'd eaten a few. I hoped that they'd had some respect for the stuff they were immortalizing. Maybe, I thought, once the light had faded for the day, they dropped the rotted fruit out an open window, hoping it would save the life of a starving beggar passing below on the street. Then I imagined the beggar, a monster with worms crawling through his matted hair, the tattered rags on his body fluttering like the wings of a bird, his eyes ablaze with desperation, his heart a caged animal begging for slaughter, hands cupped in perpetual prayer as the townspeople milled around the city square. Picasso was right to start painting the dreary and dejected, the blues. He looked out his window at his own misery. I could respect that. But these painters of fruit thought only of their own mortality, as though the beauty of their work would somehow soothe their fear of death. There they all were, hanging feckless and candid and meaningless, paintings of things, objects, the paintings themselves just things, objects, withering toward their own inevitable demise. I got the feeling that if I moved the frames to the side, I'd see the artists watching me, as though through a two-way mirror, cracking their arthritic knuckles and rubbing their stubbled chins, wondering what I was wondering about them, if I saw their brilliance, or if their lives had been pointless, if only God could judge them after all. Did they want more? Was there more genius to be wrung out of the turpentine rags at their feet? Could they have painted better? Could they have painted more generously, more clearly? Could they have dropped more fruit from their windows? Did they know that glory was mundane? Did they wish they'd crushed those withered grapes between their fingers and spent their days walking through fields of grass, or being in love, or confessing their delusions to a priest, or starving like the hungry souls they were, begging for alms in the city square with some honesty for once? Maybe they'd lived wrongly. Their greatness might have poisoned them. Did they wonder about these things? Maybe they couldn't sleep at night. Were they plagued by nightmares? Maybe they understood, in fact, that beauty and meaning had nothing to do with one another. Maybe they lived as real artists, knowing all along that there were no pearly gates. Neither creation nor sacrifice could lead a person to heaven. Or maybe not. Maybe in the morning they were aloof and happy to distract themselves with their brushes and oils, to mix their colors and smoke their pipes and go back to their fresh, still lives without having to swat away any more flies. "Step back, please," I heard a guard say. I was too close to the painting. "Step away." The notion of my future suddenly snapped into focus. It didn't exist yet. I was making it, standing there, breathing, fixing the air around my body with stillness, trying to capture something, a thought, I guess, as though such a thing were possible, as though I believed in the delusion described in those paintings, that time could be contained, held captive. I didn't know what was true, so I did not step back. Instead, I put my hand out. I touched the frame of the painting, and then I placed my whole palm on the dry, rumbling surface of the canvas, simply to prove to myself that there was no God stalking my soul. Time was not immemorial. Things were just things. "Ma'am," the guard yelled, and then there were hands gripping my shoulders, pulling me to the side. But that was all that happened. "Sorry, I got dizzy," I explained. That was it. I was free. So somehow for this character, like breaking through is kind of like breaking through her old ideas about art, I guess. And that was sort of like why I wrote the book for myself, to challenge my own cynicism and like look at what I now want to hold as sacred. So I don't know if that makes sense, but there it is. So.
Lori, how do you feel like studying sculpture influenced your writing, like in any way structurally? Like, do you feel like it changed the way you just like approach the process? Or maybe.
I think what it did was teach me something about authorship. And what I mean by that is that like the author can have a certain idea, and what gets executed might be an idea that will be inspired in the reader. And the challenge is to get those things to be the same idea. Because it's really, I mean, it's really easy to misread things visually when they're not executed well. So that was really what I felt like Rachel was trying to teach us. One of the students who came back with her like newspaper sculpture cheated, actually. One of the students cheated. You weren't supposed to use any tools. That, I forgot to mention that. So like you're really just using your hands and like all this newspaper. She rolled up the newspaper and sliced it on a saw so that it like looked like rolls of toilet paper. It was actually really cool. But what I wanted to say was this one girl made a computer, and it was like you could see that there was maybe something that we could respond to, like, but it wasn't good. Like, it wasn't a well-crafted computer. It was like a shabby, like fluttering paper, not well seamed, you know? Well, that's just a really dumb example, but like one thing that I feel like is my job as a writer to improve is to be clear. I mean, the whole point of doing any of this is to communicate something. So, like, as you know, interests can develop, like the kinds of stories that I want to tell can develop, but as long as my execution is good, you know, I feel like I've done my job.
So a lot of Rachel's work, it feels like it kind of just like happens, like as she's creating, it takes its own form. So I imagine it's hard to map this out on pen and ink. And you were also saying that with your work, you kind of just like dive in and let things kind of bubble up as they go. So I guess it's not really a question, but could you like comment on that of like, I don't know, meaning just coming to the surface kind of as you create, and maybe how that was like influenced by her?
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know if this is true about Rachel, but she said that I could say anything I wanted. So I have a feeling that there's something innate in every motivation that is the ideal art piece, that it exists kind of like outside of time, and it is just the artist's job to materialize it, like no matter what it is. And this is why I say like bad things are TV, because I mean there's a lot of amazing TV and there's a lot of really bad movies, but whatever. When things are made, like I'm someone who doesn't believe that two minds are better than one, two heads are better than one, like when it comes to art making. Like I'm sure there are people who are destined to collaborate with one another, but like I really believe that there is a predestined thing that the person is meant to make, and the job is to make it, and you can't really make a wrong move. So I wonder if when she's doing this, if she is working like just intuitively, or if she's planned things, I wonder how much she strays from them. Because I mean, you can't plan that. Can you? As much as you can, like, I think I'm gonna have, I mean, I don't know.
Prostitution. Can you tell us anything about some interests that you follow lately that you might want to follow along with?
I've been thinking and exploring a lot about incarceration. Because I'm writing an adaptation of a novel that I did not write, which takes place in a women's prison. But more broadly, like everything I've written is kind of about incarceration in a lot of ways. So, but because I had to really imagine a prison and like I'm writing a screenplay, so I have to really say like, this is what you see and this is the way people are. I can't obscure it by a narrator. I did a lot of research, and actually probably like one of the best things that I did was watch 2 seasons of TV. This show called 90 Days In, which is, I feel like should be like mandatory viewing for anyone who pays taxes, because it's like it's a reality TV show. This is not the answer you wanted, but it's okay. It's a reality TV show where non-criminals volunteer to spend 90 days in a state in jail. No, it's not prison, it's jail. There are people who are moving like from jail to prison there, but whatever. And they get briefed on, like, here's your backstory, here's how to handle these things, here's what you should know, were you a criminal, like, So they're undercover. I mean, they're having to completely adapt. So what I think is fascinating about, like, take out the, like, situation with jails and, like, institutions in the United States, but watching a human being having to adapt to a completely different environment where they have no freedom is staggering. And I guess I've never been incarcerated, so I haven't ever seen that happen. People really close to me have been incarcerated, and I've seen the ways that they have changed when they come out. So anyway, this was really fascinating. And part of what was fascinating was how quickly people started doing things that they would never do outside of that situation. 90 days in. Yeah.
Something that I find exciting about your work and Rachel's work is that they both have this very, for me at least, uncanny quality that a lot of your settings, especially in like Homesick for Another World, could exist, in this work in this room can exist on another like plane of reality. And I was wondering if you could speak to why this idea of the uncanny is so resonant in today's day and age.
I didn't know it was so resonant in today's day and age. I mean, I'm thank you. That's a huge compliment that you could recognize anything in my work like that. Uncanniness, because I think that is the magic of art, is when things feel uncanny. It's like it's like deja vu. You were supposed to see that. That's triggering something in the sacred loop of consciousness. And that's really what makes, I mean, sometimes we see something that is so completely not us that we're floored by it, I mean, I think that's why it's so easy to be like, oh, I'll just do something horrifying, because that will elicit a reaction and you will walk away stunned, But I mean, those things aren't necessarily moving, but I think when I experience art that feels like fated, like I was destined to see this, it's almost like the completion of a circle. Like, okay, it's that, It's like, okay, now I can move back into my rotation or something. Does that make sense? And I think when I'm writing, that feeling is what I'm trying to get at when I'm writing. Like, that's why I write, because it makes me feel like I'm in the groove, like in the spiritual groove, in the groove of consciousness where everything is right. And when I feel that way, I feel amazing, I mean, I wouldn't want to do it if I felt like shit all the time. Because it's hard to get there. I mean, it can take, I can spend days like looking for the zone, but then you have like, one paragraph and it's worth it.
I'm curious if you referenced any other materials or talked to any other artists when you were imagining this faux artist and version of the art world, and if those materials led you to think about the art world any differently.
Well, I really didn't know that much at all. And then I had a is it called a fellowship at, oh my God, what's that place? In New Hampshire, McDowell. I was at McDowell. I was there for 2 months. McDowell is a residency where artists of all different disciplines like come, and visual artists have studios, and I like told them I had really bad dust allergies, which is true, so I got a whole house to myself, but with all stone floor because there was no dust. So I spent 2 months there, and we'd all have meals together. So I would, every day would go to lunch or dinner and try to sit next to somebody doing visual art and try just poking around at what are you doing, and what do you think about, and how do you make a living, and all that kind of stuff. People, they like to talk, so that was I got a lot out of that experience. And what I got out of it was, it seems really hard to be a visual artist. Like you have to be so incredibly dedicated to what you're doing. For a writer, I mean, you toil a lot in solitude and go crazy, and the grandiosity is overwhelming. But in the end, you can show someone a story and they'll know exactly what you mean, even if it's not good. But I think I'm just imagining that if you're a visual artist, you can be practicing for so long, exploring what you want to make. I mean, not like those aren't necessarily finished pieces, but it's like if I practiced writing a sentence 1,000 times, you wouldn't want to see every one of those sentences. Thanks.